Good afternoon, everyone. This is our rescue mission. My name is Banner Penwell.
Nate Solomon.
Nick Camacho.
Far Habib. So some of you may recognize, this is the Starship Enterprise from Star Trek. Now, this is captained by Captain James T. Kirk, and whenever he was first becoming a captain, he had to go through a simulation called the Kobayashi Maru, for some of you nerds in there. Now, the Kobayashi Maru is a ship simulation where nothing could work. You can't get the ship out alive, you have to try and save as many people as you can, but there is casualties. That's not our situation. And he had to cheat to get through it, which we don't have to do gratefully.
So like Banner mentioned, we have a problem. So what is the problem? So essentially, as you guys know, we sent a rocket up to our satellite with some personnel and some payloads. So here in the middle, you can see three thrusters on each side, and they're split up into two bays. Half the bays have been compromised and no longer work, so we're working only at half capacity. So that leaves us with a couple of constraints. So we have some conflicting priorities, so we have to decide whether we want to prioritize safety, revenue, and long-term viability as long as we only have this one rocket, so we want to get it there and back. And that also leaves us with some passenger safety risks and some payload uncertainties. So as far as being half capacity, we only have a certain amount of energy to spend, and that could come at the cost of personnel risk as far as their health, and then also payload uncertainty as far as having to get rid of them. And that also has to do with our time-sensitive decision, because we only have a 2-minute window we have to get into in order to get the ship there and back all safely. So as I mentioned, we have 4 personnel on the ship. Okay, we have Caitlin Taylor. She is a Galaga exploration, and we have Jean Hong, which, as you guys may know, is here at the company as a company tech along with the ship. And then we also have a famous billionaire, Orso Sal, and then Rebecca Walls, who is a cancer survivor we actually sponsored to go up and find a cure for cancer. And I also added some additional attributes that we needed to take into consideration when doing our analysis. As I mentioned before, five payloads. So we have Galaga Exploration. That's with the lady before. This is Mars Exploration. And then we have in the middle, we have All People Connect, which provides internet connection, so people can go to the internet all around the world. And then in the bottom corner, we have U.S. Space Force, which is a U.S. Department of Defense contract, which we've been told that is classified, so we're not quite sure what's in that, but we deem it to be very important as it is a U.S. contract. Then up in the corner, like I mentioned, Purge Cancer AI. So this is the solve for cancer, and then in the bottom corner again is asteroid defense, which is pretty self-explanatory.
All right. When looking to evaluate options in succeeding within our mission, we found that there are 4 main areas we need to value above all else. Firstly, we need to ensure the safe return of our travelers. Like Nate mentioned, we have 4 people on board, and it is essential that we bring them back to Earth safely with us. Number 2 is preserving the integrity of the Transporter 5 spaceship. This is a one-of-a-kind spaceship, and there's not a replacement for it. We do have the ability to do maintenance on it once we get it back down to Earth, or we need it back down to Earth safely. Number 3 is optimize our payload installation. As Nate also mentioned, we have 5 separate payloads. We need to find the most optimal system in terms of which ones we're going to install, if we're going to jettison those, and what we're going to do in that level of things. Lastly, maximize profitability. We want to not only ensure the safety of our passengers, ensure the integrity of our ship, but we'd also like to find a way to remain profitable.
So we talked about the problem, talked about our mission, now we should talk about our solutions. Firstly, we had talked about how we determined our solution. Originally, we looked at it and we said we can build an optimization model, we can use Python, we can use Gurobi. However, always keep it simple, stupid, if you can. If you don't need to go more complex, don't go more complex. So, firstly, crew safety is paramount. If we don't bring everyone home, mission viability is not going to work. As those in the FAA industry or those in the aviation industry, it takes 1 or 2 planes to come down per year, and there's thousands and thousands of more flights, but people are scared to fly. So the data always does convince people that it's safe. Next, so then we try to determine the feasible efficiency for all segments. After looking at it, we want to determine if manual flight was a better option. We'll talk about that later. Finally, we talked about the Greedy-Danzig rule. This is an application within the simplex method where you grab the best coefficient for optimality. That means if something has a larger reward for a lesser risk, we're going to maximize that coefficient as best we can and then go from there. After applying this, we tried to keep the best payload solutions to maximize profit. Originally, we tried all 5, which if you try all 5, you kill all the passengers, which obviously we're not willing to do. So we had to decide which one to get rid of, and we'll talk about that later. Finally, when we had our 4 main payloads that we decided to keep, we messed around with the different thrust capacities to make sure we hit that optimal time window. Because if we don't hit that time window, we don't come home and people don't make it. So, the solution. We calculated our manual efficiency as shown here for each segment. We showed the life support for each segment and the thrust that we decided to pick for each segment. If you look here, the crew health is 30, 25, 34, and 20. After talking with the flight engineer, they told us that it was a binary figure. Therefore, if you have 5 health, you're perfectly healthy and alive. If you have 40 health, you're perfectly healthy and alive. We wanted to make sure that we didn't have any extra slack for energy that we could use other places to help deliver the payloads for our individuals. So we installed All People Connect, the US Space Force, Cancer Purge AI, Asteroid Defense. We sadly had to jettison Gal Exploration. It was extremely heavy, and sadly, it's looking forward to the future while most of these have real-world impacts today and tomorrow. From this, we were able to generate $73 million from our service revenue. We maintained all of our ticket revenue because we kept all of our passengers alive. We paid no life insurance due to everyone coming back home safe. And we only had a $2 million replacement insurance for the jettison. Finally, we come to the final profit of $91 million. The big question is, do we make our time window? The reason we chose that the thrust for the full for the first 2, 2/3 for the third, and full for the last, it allowed us to have the best time window. Because too early is just as bad as too late. So if you look here, we're about 1 minute and 6 seconds early from our last end time window. So we split the difference right in the middle perfectly. Now, the statistical analysis, we decided to go with the historical data from manual flight. So therefore, how do we know what efficiencies we calculate are trustworthy? Firstly, it listed heat, vibration, and pressure. So we tried to determine if there's any sort of correlation between those variables and our final efficiency. So we did a variable correlation analysis to analyze to see if there's a correlation between any of them. Firstly, the p-value, if it's not above 0.05, it's not statistically significant. So as you can see, vibration is already out and no longer listed. Heat and pressure, the values were statistically significant. However, the R values are so low, it means it explains none of the variance. Therefore, all 3 of these variables have no statistical effect upon efficiency. Something to note, it says bank 2 and bank 2 for both. Originally, the data gave us both bank 1 and bank 2 data. But as Nate described, we only have the right 3 engines, which is bank 2. So we went ahead and cleaned that half of the data set out of bank 1. Because bank 1 data we were afraid would skew our actual model. Therefore, this is the most realistic picture for our model that we can give. So because we can take efficiency at name value for its numerical values, we calculated the mean, the min-max, the standard deviation, and a confidence interval. We did a 99% confidence interval, meaning that if we can pick 99% of the time, our values will fall between these 2 figures. From there, we ran a simulation with all of the confidence intervals, both the bottom end and the top end. So you pick the lowest end you can, run the simulation, everyone comes home safe. We did the same for the top end of the simulation for the confidence interval at the top half. Right, but okay, so we feel pretty confident we can come home. Let's double check. So then let's run the min values, including the outliers, which as you can see here is drastically different in some cases than the 99% confidence interval. Let's run the absolute bottom end, let's run the absolute top end. So we ran 4 more simulations, and every time people come home safe. This is why we're confident, statistically confident, that our data will keep people safe in the long run. Finally, this is a box plot. If anyone has ever seen box plots before, this doesn't look like a box plot. There's no boxes. So the top and the bottom and those 2 extra lines that you're all used to seeing, they're all right there. This is how extremely dense the data is. The standard deviation is 0.0074, which is ridiculously small. And the 4 or 5 dots on either end, those are the outliers. And even the outliers, how few they are, they're very close to the model, which allows us to take those outliers and run for the efficiencies. So therefore, out of 1,000 data points, if 1 or 2 are the crazy ones, we still bring everyone home safe. So we're statistically confident that our model works.
Let's get ready.
So going into this problem and solving it, we understand that VP and Chief Operating Managers had some concerns that we wanted that to be our main priority by solving and prioritizing high profitability and minimizing risk factor by losing human lives. And for example, we did that by for VP for customer relations, we made our human lives factor our main priority. We didn't care about making high profit. We just wanted to get our people back home safe.
And to the VP of Sales and Marketing, your main concern was making money as far as payload revenue and a little bit less care on people's health and safety. But through our data, statistically, we have found that we make the highest amount of revenue while keeping everybody safe and only getting rid of one payload.
The VP of Development, I know that you were concerned about the integrity of our ship as well as the safety of our passengers. You even maybe suggested that we should just jettison all of our payloads and focus solely on the ship and our passengers. But we think that we found a way to not only value the passengers as well as the ship and also get some of those payloads installed.
To the VP of Analytics, your original concern was that we have a lack of data, which is causing it difficult to find the direction of which we should go. And that's why we dove deeper into the statistical data and the historical data to see if we can have a viable, statistically defendable option, which we believe that we have. To the COO, your original issue was that you don't think we can find a a viable solution before the deadline that we have of 5:30. But after checking with to make sure we keep everyone alive, we deliver the payloads that we need, and we keep the ship in good standing, we believe that we found a solution that's viable. And finally, to Mr. Leonard, this is not a Kobayashi Maru. Let's continue to boldly go forth as many men have gone before.
As a team, we understand that this is not 100% profitable because we get 4 out of 5 payloads stationed and installed. However, due to our data and our thoughtful analysis, we had came to an optimal solution that this solution is the best solution we can come up as a team.
Thank you.
So the Galaga was the only payload that had a technician on board. Is there any concern to the optics of that's the one you chose to jettison?
I would say yes, there's always a concern of optics. However, the other options that we would jettison either would greatly affect revenue, thus costing the company large amounts of money and future feasibility. This is a for-profit company. Or it would be, let's go back to it, where we have payloads. So the U.S. Space Force is obviously the big breadwinner. If we got rid of All People Connect, we didn't see the reason to because the weight was low in comparison to the others, and it had a good service, a good revenue, and it also provided a great amount of service to the most amount of people, which we think would affect public view. If everyone has free internet and we decide that no one has free internet, that's a difficult decision. As well as the 10,000 individuals with the cancer software solution, if we decided to jettison that one, that would have been the most reasonable solution to jettison, as its weight is quite heavy, its power demand is one of the highest, and it has some of the lowest revenue. However, if we jettison that, we're costing the lives of possibly 10,000 individuals, which is now on our hands, which is against what the company is for.
Can you speak specifically to the asteroid versus Galaga?
Yeah, we're still on Earth, and we're looking to go to Mars in the future.
Okay.
However, most of the individuals who we have PR with are still on Earth and would like us to defend this Earth rather than look forward to the future. Originally, the Galaga exploration was to look for future planning towards Mars, which our solution is a today issue. And therefore, if they come back down, we have 3 years of flight data and about 1,000 entries, meaning they take a flight every 1.09 days. Therefore, if we decide to come back down, we rebuild, we pay their insurance settlement, they're more likely to be able to fix whatever we broke or reinstall whatever we jettisoned and go back up within a feasible time frame if they're just planning to go to Mars.
I had a question, since I'm not as familiar with the data, but if we lost navigation engine bank 1 and we just had bank 2, and you guys are going over the last 1,000 flights and looking at efficiency for bank 2, was there ever flights where you were flying with just bank 2? Or is the efficiency always looking at bank 1 and bank 2 at the same time?
The efficiency was listed as bank 1, engines 1 through 3. So it wasn't for an entire flight, it was for an individual engine. So therefore, we removed the engines that are no longer in flight, or no longer working. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So since multiple things have already gone wrong, with your proposed solution, is there any margin for error?
As you can see, can you go to the, sorry, I probably should, yeah, that one. As you can see, the reentry time, like we said, that's the margin for error that we put in for. Everybody's healthy, everybody's safe, so there's always a manual time for people to operate the ship. We also made sure we put it right dab smack in the middle of our delivery time.
But power-wise?
Oh, sorry.
With PowerWise, we had 10 units left over, and if we looked at it from this perspective, if we were less efficient and required more power, we made sure to input the lowest amount of efficiency that we could calculate, which if you take the mins there and you drop it by an additional 5%, we still make the time window. And none of the, when you drop it by 5%, those are all far beyond outside of any outliers that are listed in the data set. Can we take questions from people? Or, yeah, go ahead.
So the data which they gave was like 1,000 flights. So it's the data when the two banks are working, right? It's not when one bank has failed and one bank is working. So that the data which they gave us when the two banks are working properly. But the problem which we're working on is right when the one bank is failed. So have you analyzed that failing the banking one affects the efficiency of banking?
We do not have the data to analyze that. However, it was not, all of these are running together, and this is the efficiency of the overall flight. It's doing per individual engine. Therefore, it is the fuel and the air and the mixture into this engine for each of the three. And we removed the data from the three that are not working from bank one. Does that make sense?
I mean, technically, if you have two thrusts, if one of the engine fails, this need to have a lot more power, right? I mean, this will take a lot more heat, pressure, and vibration, so that it will obviously affect the efficiency.
I don't think that's a fair assumption because heat, vibration, and pressure don't only come from the engine, it can also come from outside forces such as speed throughout space.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dean Bigler. We're here with Team 12 today.
I'm Carson Horsberg. And I'm Kevin Turner.
We're super excited to go into our presentation today. So we're going to go ahead and start off by understanding the launch. We're going to go through the segments of our presentation, explain a little bit about what we're doing. We're going to begin with the problem overview. We realize that there are millions of different combinations to solve this problem, but it isn't just a data decision. The real problem that we're dealing with here is not only data, but it's also an ethical and moral decision. We have to decide people's lives when they're at stake. We have to make decisions about all sorts of things with revenue, profits, so on and so forth. So we wanted to look at this problem from a bigger lens. That led us down the road to our second section of realizing that there are different priorities. Each and every one of you, as an executive, has to decide what you're going to prioritize in a mission like this. We wanted to build a model that reflected that. It doesn't just give one static output, but rather lets you rank your priorities and then gives an output according to what you most prefer. Because that's how the real world works. We emphasize that more in our third section with scenario analysis. We take a look at some of the requirements and priorities of the three different VPs and the different situations that could possibly happen and show how our model outputs things that are best for each and every constraint. Finally, we'll move on to the back end of this with the data-driven decisions, looking at the efficiency numbers and showing how we're able to make it to where we can be confident with Monte Carlo simulation of over 10,000 different calculations of how we know our predictions are accurate. Finally, we'll move on to what we believe is the optimal priorities and the optimal result of this project. Go ahead and dive in. I'm going to pass it off to Carson for the problem overview.
Thank you, Dean. Switch it over here. There we go. Okay, so we want to identify how many possible outcomes are there. We found over 800 million total possible outcomes. In doing so, we realized this is not a simple quantitative problem. There's morals at stake. There are lives not only on the ship, but with cancer patients on Earth. So we can't just have a simple profit maximization approach. So in trying to find, is there a one right solution, we realize it's going to vary depending on who we're speaking to. Is it us simply cranking numbers in an Excel sheet, or is it the CEO of the company that we're reporting to? So it all depends on priorities. So let's try to identify some of these priorities that we're looking at. We identified 4 potential priorities, 4 groupings that we can quantify. That is company assets, such as the ship itself, making sure that it lands back here on Earth. People, the lives here at stake. Customer payloads, as well as maximizing profit.
And now we'll go into how we got these priorities into the model. First, we start with the goal. We want to be able to rank those priorities and integrate them in a quantitative way to back up our data-driven efficiency numbers. So the process is the model reads the rankings and applies them through a VBA integrated solver. It then goes into, then after the regressions find the manual engine efficiencies, they enter them in the ranking. The VBA then reads it, scans it, says which one's number one, which one's number two. And then it goes down the list. Case one gets the first one, solves it, and then optimizes it for that ranking, saves that data, goes to the next case. What's number two? Solves it, optimizing it for the second priority. Saves that, it goes down the list until it optimizes the execution plan for all the priorities down the list. And now we'll go into each scenario analysis with Dean.
So for each scenario, we realized that we wanted to mimic a real-world perspective. Each and every one of you executives shouldn't just be told why our solution is better than yours or why you'll be okay if we go with ours instead of yours. We need to show you what would actually matter. So to illustrate that, we looked at the different vice presidents' restrictions or different things they were looking for. And we'll get more into those in just a second. But we realized it ultimately comes down to their values, and the decision is made by the COO in this case. So we need to give him a system to prioritize those different things. That's what our model does. Let's take a look at how that would look with our first Vice President of Customer Relations. Now that box up on the top right, they're able to drag around those 4 different things and decide which order they prioritize them in. The model then scans through that and sees that their primary goal is to save lives. It then does the optimization model accordingly, and it gets us where 5 modules are dropped so that we don't deploy any, but all the lives are saved, and we can be more than 99% certain that the ship returns home, all with a profit of $13 million. Let's look at the next situation. Maybe the Vice President of Sales and Marketing has a little different. They could go ahead and do this to rearrange their priorities. Now customer payload's at the top, and their goal is to install the modules. This leaves us with the optimization model deploying all 5 modules. 0 passengers live, and the chance of return home is a little bit less, but revenue made is much higher. That's the priorities, that's what this spits out. Let's keep going. Let's take a look at the Vice President of Development. Once again, could change this up a little bit and decide that their priority is saving lives and the ship. So they dump all the modules in the optimization model, they bring everyone home, and once again are very certain that they will hit the window. All for the low price of $2 million. Now finally, let's take a look at what we thought was the best solution. We took our values and we said that we would rearrange them a little bit in order to save lives and maximize revenue. This gave us what we believe to be the optimal solution, which we'll discuss in more detail later, where we bring 4 or 5 modules into orbit. We're able to make $91 million of revenue and not cost a single life. The module that we don't deploy is the one for the Mars expansion, so the one with the cancer is still able to be put in and save additional lives. Let's actually look at these all together before we go into further detail, just kind of on a relative plotting to help get a better visualization of it.
Thank you, Dean. All right, so looking at the scenario analysis, what we did here is we listed all of the C-suite individuals with their inputs and created scenarios in our output summary. What it ranks is revenue and morality. You can see very clearly that us, group number 4, created the best and most efficient solution, not only maximizing revenue, but also creating a high morality with all the lives being saved. And let's figure out how we got here.
So first, we just start with the historical data. Obviously, there's some stuff cleaning that needs to be done. For example, Bank 1, right off the bat, it was one of the things that failed. And so we had to filter out on Bank 1 data to get just to the Bank 2. Second, there's efficiencies that were over 100%. There's no way an engine can produce over their max load, so we did filter those out as well. And then just to increase the cleanliness of the data, we removed outliers over 3 standard deviations away. And then the inputs to the model, each efficiency number is separated by segment. So we decided we're going to separate the data that way. So we filtered out the data by each segment, 1, 2, 4, and 5. We then ran a regression, a multivariate regression across heat, pressure, and vibration, and efficiency. We got that the correlation between efficiency and those 3 other variables across the 4 segments was about 85%, which is a very strong correlation. This
combined with our back-tested Monte Carlo simulation, gave us great confidence. We ran 10,000 simulations across, plugging in to our model every efficiency number from as high as the historical data had to as low as the historical data had to as high as it had, and ran it 10,000 times, and every single time it still hit the window, the re-entry window. So that supports our claim that the model is not only the best optimized, it's also going to get us back safe and entry it every time. And now we'll go into the people. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so once again, we wanted to dive a little bit deeper into our our specific solution. We wanted to discuss our 3 main priorities and why we chose them. So our first one was people. The second, company assets or returning the ship home safely. And finally, was maximizing revenue. We felt that for people, it was a non-negotiable to bring home all the passengers we took to space. Not only that, it held up our moral value, but also our fiduciary responsibility as the owners of the company. We also leaned into saving the lives via cancer research. There was a module that will save 10,575 lives, and we wanted to prioritize that as well, and the model was able to do that. Moving on to something like the company assets, Kellen's going to discuss.
Yeah, just kind of go back into the Monte Carlo analysis. That was a large thing to us was getting back the ship. It has to make it back because you can't have future missions with it. And so after we ran the regressions, got our efficiency numbers and plugged them in the model, got our optimized execution plan, we then back-checked it by creating a Monte Carlo analysis and running all those. And it just supported that out of the 10,000 simulations, 100% of the time, in every single one of those simulations, we made it back with the ship safe, so we can run future missions.
Yeah, I mean, 100% success rate is crucial. So now let's look at maximizing profit. So our goal here was to save lives. But we found a way to maximize profit while saving all the lives and creating all the good morals that we wanted to achieve. We actually found the maximum profit opportunity with 91 million being created. This was created by only dropping off an exploration project. So everyone's saved, all the big revenue producers are still intact, and we're able to bring that ship back into space when need be. And I'll pass it off to Dean to conclude.
So let's take a look back through what we talked about today. We began with our problem overview. We realized that there isn't just one correct solution because we're dealing with morality. We need something that's more flexible than that. Because as a CEO or a decision maker, you need to be able to decide what you value most, not just what some other person's data or some other person's value. By doing that, we looked into a priority-based decision making that lets you rearrange the outputs and choose the optimal situation for each. Finally, next we looked at scenario analysis to see how this would play out in something like a real-life business case scenario. After that, we moved on to examining our data-driven decisions to see how we did multivariate regressions in 10,000 simulations on a Monte Carlo simulation to see exactly what would happen in all the different use cases to give us confidence that our predictions actually come true. Finally, we took a look at our own priorities and values and figured out that this is the most optimal one for our requirements. We took the values that we prioritize, placed them into the model, and we wanted to make it a way that each and every one of you could do the same. We tried to build something here today that didn't just give one fixed, hard solution for one problem, but rather something that could adapt to not only the individual executive making the decision, but also any future calamities or problems that could require this kind of decision making. Thank you all so much. We're happy to answer any questions.
So, did you all check with your data, like that it was distributed properly, that it met the assumptions of like the statistical models that you're trying to use?
Did you repeat that, sorry?
Did you validate that the data actually met the assumptions of the statistical models that you were using? Whether that was like the simulation or like creating your efficiency numbers and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we went ahead and took the list of or all the values, and we both plotted them and ran a couple of different mathematical functions on them to see kind of what the distribution was. Like we talked about, the main thing for us was a Monte Carlo situation. So we had to deal with making sure we had no really fat tails on our data or anything like that. We were able to filter a lot of that, not only by cleaning the data, but removing things over 3 standard deviations, which is just a couple of values, but to make sure our models actually ran. So absolutely, we had to make sure the data worked for the correct models to use.
So when y'all built it to be able to look at it from different perspectives, is that something y'all like manually put together for each perspective, or does your model, are you able to dynamically change it?
Yeah, so because originally when Solver, I mean, you have to manually hardcode everything to get max of value, you said, but we want to make it dynamic, so it could do that. So there's a ranking at the top of the list, it's a range of values, and it says what you want, and just rank the payload versus the saving lives, and you rank it. And then when you press the button, the VBA macro runs it, scans those rankings, then inputs it in. And then it loops through it, the VBA code that we mentioned earlier, priority 1, scans whichever priority is on top, it immediately implements that and runs. So for example, if the number 1 priority was save lives, it sets the requirement that all the health bars have to stay above 0, and it runs that first and optimizes it. And it saves that data, and it goes to next 2, and says, get as many payloads as you can. It then runs and optimizes that to have as many payloads as it can. It just goes down the list, priority list. And so it's dynamic because it scans through every time just by the press of a button.
It makes it as easy as possible, and that's why we actually have these. You can see just by changing the prioritization ranking, it automatically changes it. Make it as easy as possible for the CEO whose time is crucial.
To maximize efficiency, some of the other teams were showing what they had to set the life support to in the different segments. Did you guys break that down?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be in our appendix. And for our situation specifically, go ahead and do our outputs of our solution model, appendix 1. Yeah. So you can see in here, sorry, the numbers are a little bit small, but we found that 3 of them would have to be set at critical. Sorry, our model found that 3 of them would have to be set at critical, while 1 of them was at standard, had enough power for it. So we were able to just do that configuration, and the model starts with the largest and then follows down the constraint. So that's why you see 40, 10, 10, 10. Yeah, happy to explain those values further if there's something else you're asking.
Yes. That part right there, when the model's running, if they can still keep someone alive, if it is optimizing the traveler health, keeping their health, the health bar is going to go as low as you can without actually killing someone, because then power can be diverted somewhere else. So it's optimizing, putting power elsewhere, and be able to get that side of things while still keeping them alive.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry that we have to meet here today under these horrible circumstances. I hope that our analysis today provides results that completes our mission in an excellent way. My name is Rachel Kate.
I'm Lily Holler. I'm Kaylin Reaper. And I'm Danielle Nestor.
And we're Team 20. To start off, we have 7 classifier tables that we were provided with and 1 historical data table. This historical data table contained 24,000 rows that showed data on 1,000 flights previously flown with the same ship. What we wanted to look at was how this data can help us complete our mission in a successful way. How we did that was through 3 main objectives. 1, passenger preservation. We want to make sure all of our passengers make it home safely. 2, mission completion. We want to make sure that the job that we set out to do is done. And 3, maintain profitability. We are a business. We want to make money and make sure that we are continuing to bring revenue in. Now I'll pass it off to Kaylin, who will jump in a little further.
All right, our approach emphasized 3 measures here: profit, passengers, and payloads. To go deeper into that, we believe that passengers have an inherent ethical value to them. We don't want to just abandon them on the ship and just let them out for profit. We also believe that by saving them, we can create a long-term brand integrity, and this will help our brand going forward. We also know that we have a duty to our customers to complete the job that they asked us to do. That includes installing the payloads at the point of installment and then getting that done for them. So we want to install as many payloads as possible. And as any business, we want to emphasize profit. This is maximizing revenue and minimizing costs. And that goes into passengers and payloads. So if we get our passengers home safe, that creates revenue for us and reduces costs. And if we get our payloads installed, that also does the same. The key issue with this mission is the re-entry point. We have a very limited time. We only have 2 minutes to re-enter. And if we miss that, the rest of our calculations don't matter. We do have 2 constraints. We have a limited power supply and we have a limited entry window. Both of those play a really crucial role in this. If we miss, or if we run out of power or we miss the entry time, the T5 will run out of power, we don't make it back for re-entry, our passengers will die, and we will lose the T5, which is a really valuable asset to our company going forward. And now I'll pass it off to Danielle to continue with our models. Thanks, Kaylin. Okay, so as Kaylin discussed, we focused on the 3 Ps of profit, passengers, and payloads. So we made different models based on each of those 3 Ps. This first one is for profit. So as you can see, we start off with having to jettison the Gallaudet exploration. Rachel Kate will explain why we chose this one in a little bit. We continue on to the installation point and successfully install the other 3 payloads. And then we continue on to re-entry, and this model produces $91 million in profit with 4 passengers surviving. So just to reiterate, this model was aimed at maximizing profit. Our second one focused on passengers. This one, we start and have to jettison 2 payloads at the beginning. Again, Rachel Kate will explain why we picked these. We continue on to the installation where we successfully install 3 of the payloads, and then continue on to re-entry, make it in time. This model produces $76 million in profit, and all 4 passengers survive. You may have noticed the first model also included all 4 passengers surviving. The thing that differentiates this is that with the first model, we weren't really prioritizing passenger health. We were making the assumption that if passenger health is decreasing throughout the mission, it could mean that they could have long-term health effects after the mission is completed. And so we wanted to make a model that prioritizes keeping the life support at the standard value for the entire duration of the mission. And that came at the cost of having to jettison 2 of the payloads at the beginning. Our third model focused on payloads. As you can see, it failed. But this one was with the approach of trying to see, is it even possible to try to get all 5 payloads shipped? And the answer is no. Even at the expense of the lives of our passengers, it's still not possible to get all 5 payloads successfully installed. In order to make this model work, we had to still jettison 1 payload at the beginning, and then the profit ended up being only $68 million. So now I'm going to pass it off to Rachel Kate to talk a little bit more about the metrics that went into deciding our settings for these models.
Thank you, Danielle. So what we wanted to do with our 3 models was basically break it out as many ways as possible. There's a lot of management that is going into this decision. We're just trying to provide you with the options. So that's what we wanted to do with our 3 options. How we did this, all our models are based on variables. Variables provide the information to make these different. One of our key variables was efficiency. Efficiency was calculated when you switch from flight control from automation to manual. Therefore, you have to create a manual efficiency that plays into the power and how the flight makes it back to the reentry point on time. And so how we did that was through looking at the historical efficiency rate data. We did a distribution of efficiency by segment, by bank. We only have bank 2 open. Bank 1 engines are not functioning, so we didn't want to look at engines that weren't working, that could maybe potentially skew the data. And so we looked specifically at bank 2, and this is an example of segment 2. That's more so just an example of looking at it at the segment level. Each segment has a different duration, has a different distance that it was going, and that plays into efficiency also. So we want to look specifically at a segment and how efficiencies were distributed previously. So what we did, we then picked one of those that we've already seen. Now's not the time to explore a new efficiency rate, try and push the limits. We are just trying to make it home safely. And so that's what we wanted to do. How we wanted to prove that though was not just to pick one of those and hope it works, but to actually prove it. So what we found was the efficiency formula is actual thrust divided by max thrust. And the problem was that in our historical data table, we didn't have thrust data. And so what we had to do was manipulate the formula to calculate thrust and actual thrust in the historical data. And so we, as you can see on that bottom formula, we multiplied the efficiency, the historical efficiency rates by max thrust, which is determined by engine control. There's 3 engine control options of 85,000, 70,000, and 30,000. And so with these, you have the 3 options, and we, based on our engine control that we set, knew that if we set our efficiency levels at a certain level, it would perform in this way, and it matched. And so that's what we did to prove that our efficiency levels were set to the right example. Another key variable was our payload validation. As Danielle was mentioning, we had to jettison. And so how do you decide between which payload to do? We weren't provided with a lot of background information on these specific payloads. So we had to take a little bit of a subjective approach, but we did it as objective as we possibly could by assigning weighted averages. As you can see here, there's a final WWA and a final WWA $sign. So these are 2 different ones that we created. One focused on power and time, our 2 main constraints, and one focused on profitability, the business side of that. So then you can look at it different. There's different weights that go into those 2, and what we did was we weighted each payload based on the attributes in the payload table. And we created a percentage for each of those, and then we weighted the columns specifically. Because insurance revenue might be less important than the weight of the installation until you get to segment 3. And so we kind of did that, and we created these. Our highest ones were the most important to us. So as you can see here, Cancer Purge AI is actually the lowest, but we thought it was ethically wrong to do that. To jettison Cancer Purge AI would mean more than just affecting our company and our passengers, but to affect thousands of people after we land and potentially in the future. So we didn't want to do that, and so therefore the next best option was Galaga Exploration. And that's how we made that decision, and then in our second model, the second best was All People Connect. And so moving on, pass it off to Lily to wrap us up.
Thank you, Rachel Kate. So looking here, we can see our final solution. This is the specific metrics that we had chosen and set the transporter to be at to be able to make it home. This model is model 1, the one that we chose that would be the model focused on profit. So with that, sorry, that was very loud. With that, we would be able to prioritize profit. So with this specific model, we will still earn 89% of the original profit, which is $91 million. On top of that, we get all 4 passengers home, and we're able to get 4 out of 5 of the payloads installed at the segment. We also took it upon ourselves to highlight the value of this model. We wanted to look at the public relations aspect of this. The brand image of our company is very important, and if we were to have a crash or were to not make it back to the reentry point, we would that would be very detrimental to our public image. So we wanted to take time to share that value proposition as well with our specific model. So overall, we really took into account our 3 Ps: our profit, our passengers, and our payloads. With that, we were able to come to the solution that hits almost every bit of those different metrics so that we could get everyone home safely and help with the long term of our company's success. So with that, as time allows, we'll pass it on to Rachel Kate. She's going to look at our appendix slides.
Yes, we have an appendix, and with our extra time, we thought we might as well just jump right in. So here, we will start off with our next steps. We wanted to outline those. We had a limited amount of time, and so what were we going to do if we had more time, or what would we do if we maybe had a more expansive data set? What we would do first is investigate vibration split trends. So we looked at correlations between heat, vibration, and pressure, which show up in our efficiency rating table, and how they relate to efficiency rates. what we noticed was there's a positive correlation with heat and pressure. But there's a weird split that happens when vibration gets added into it. And so we weren't sure, we didn't have enough time to investigate vibration further. And so with further time, we would want to look how vibration interacts with those as they correlate. Another one would be improving the weighted average. Like I said, we had to kind of subjectively do this with a limited amount of information. And so what we would want to do is do our research, investigate further, ask good questions about what these payloads actually mean and who they're represented by and things like that, where we could make a more precise calculation and weight those more accurately. And then thirdly, predictive modeling to determine variable effects for future flights. And so what we wanted to do with that is this is not a time, we're in a critical moment. We want to make sure that we are getting home. It's not a time to try and predict something. And so that would be something that maybe in future we could find the best, most optimal variables that play into that. Thank you.
In your first model with profit, why did you choose to go ahead and keep that passenger rather than going ahead and killing them, knowing that you could maximize the profit at 103 or 4,000 or million?
The passenger with the lowest health who would be in trouble if we did that, he's actually our technician who would be responsible for doing the installs, so we didn't want to jeopardize his life and then jeopardize the potential of having installations carried out.
He appreciates that.
And because his life has inherent value.
So when you talk about life support, then did you guys do the analysis on where you would have dropped between standard and critical?
So, to be honest, the life support of this was pretty much plugging into the descriptive model, which we really appreciate being provided to us. There's not a lot of wiggle room, especially when you're trying to correctly allocate power. So we had already tried to allocate as much power as we could to the mission, bringing it down to manual, and then it was just a matter of trying to keep them alive long enough to at least get the install when we were looking at the payloads module. So really it just came down to allocating power. We tried to keep it at standard the whole time. The only time we dropped it to critical is if we were in trouble of not having enough power to complete the trip. And we did some further analysis of whether or not having it set at critical would be more beneficial for certain segments compared to others. And we arrived at the one that we had.
So if life support is the minimal impact, what do you think the biggest impact is?
I feel like the engine can make
biggest impact of what?
Well, of all the potential influencers that are there, we said the life support is the lowest potential having impact. What of the others, engine control, flight control, what do you think has the biggest impact on making the decision? And that's okay to not have a particular one. I'm just curious to know.
Yeah.
So I am blanking on the specific names because I'm slightly nervous being up here, but the one that controls the thrust power being 1/3 versus 2/3 versus full power, I think we noticed the most change being affected with adjusting that one.
And with that one ties into our efficiency rating, which then leads to power and it all kind of circles back. So I would agree with that one. Yes.
Were you able to find a model that would solve all 5 payloads?
So the payloads focused Model 3, that's what we were attempting to do with that, trying to install all 5 payloads, even if it was at the risk of the lives of the passengers, and we determined it's not possible without jettisoning at least one of the payloads. So that's why the model failed, and we still had to jettison the Galaga one, and it only produced 68 million in profit. So.
What modeling tool or what have you used for this solution?
We used a lot of Excel, which was provided for us. We also looked at the data tables in SQL Server, allowed us to quickly visualize those and pull them up and look at multiple at once. I did the So are you asking about evaluation, that one? This one's done in Jump Pro, which is a software that we use here in Spears. And so you can quickly, it has a drag and drop software, which is really awesome. And then you can just quickly visualize things like this.
Thank you all for joining us for our presentation of our failure analysis and execution plan of Mission 0934.
I'm Evelyn Larson.
I'm Adrienne Huntley. I'm Chloe Flood.
And I'm Braden Bauer.
As you know, a line break in our nuclear magnetic engine bank 1 resulted in the overheating of our primary engine banks at the Transporter 5. This left the ship with limited battery power and also a decreased window to complete all installations and enter the window for re-entry into the atmosphere. The distance between senior leadership's priorities as far as solving the problem faced us with our business problem. We needed to determine and justify an optimal solution for getting the Transporter 5 back in light of stakeholder preferences and a critical public eye. The last words we heard before preparing for our case was that failure is not an option. So we knew our first step was to determine the parameters for what success is and what failure is. Based on the statements made by our senior level staff, we determined that people, precision, and profits were our most important factors, and together the trifecta created what we call an optimal PR. This is how the brand will come across at the end of the event. Human lives are invaluable, so we made preservation of life the most important factor in determining how we would solve this problem. With that as our set parameter, losing no life, we went forward to create as many installations as we could. That way we could maximize profit as well as minimize cost and relationship damage.
Here's the 3 steps to our methodology of solving this problem. First, we have data understanding, where we took the descriptive model that was provided to us and the historical efficiency data, along with the rest of the files that we were given, and we provided context to the variables that we were given. Step 2 was descriptive model optimization, where we took our goals and we wanted to accomplish as much of them as we can, starting with human life. We then have step 3, where we took our completed model and we used applications such as Excel, Power BI, R, and Jump to all create an optimized model. Now, we felt that there were 5 key variables to this equation. There were 3 critical constraints and 21 total variables or inputs that we felt that inputted the final outcome. So here is our execution plan. First, we have flight control. We did not use AI at all. We used manual throughout the entire trip. We then have engine command with full in the first and fourth segments and 2/3 in the second and fifth. Then we have life support, which we kept on critical for most of the mission except on the fourth segment, which we adjusted to standard. And then for our manual efficiency, we have 89%, 94%, 98%, and 93%. And as you can see, we did jettison one of our modules, the Galaga exploration module.
All right, thank you, Brendan, for setting up the methods for our analysis. I'd now like to dive in a little bit deeper into our data analysis and show you how we validated all of the inputs for our model. So the first thing we analyzed was our efficiency scores, and we decided to prioritize this relates to duration, which ensures that our people are number one priority and they get home on time. So the way we approached deciding the optimal efficiency quantities was we began with a regression analysis. In Jump Pro, we saw that the segment ID variable is the most powerful predictor of efficiency, and it's also the only significant variable impacting efficiency in the historical data set. And so with this in mind, we were able to split out across the 5 segments the average efficiency scores based on the historical data. And we further verified these findings with a confidence interval. Our 99% confidence interval shows us that we can reasonably expect that about 99 times out of 100, our efficiency scores will fall within this critical range. The next key decisions to make were based on life support in our engine command settings. And so to solve this, we used a optimization solution in Excel Solver. Here our objective was to maximize battery to ensure that we had enough fuel and power to make it back home to Earth. Our decision variables for this Excel Solver model were broken out across the 4 segments, and then it encompassed variables like life support and engine command for each segment. So you have, for life support, you have your full life support, critical, and off, and for engine command, you have your standard, 2/3, and 1/3 options. Now the constraints for this model are the health, of course, of our travelers, secondly, duration, which is directly impacted by the efficiency scores that we just discussed, and lastly, the minimum battery health. So here below, you can see the solution provided by Solver. Our engine commands are as follows: full in segments 1 and 4, 2/3 in segments 2 and 5 for our engine command. And for life support, we have critical in all segments except for segment 4. So overall, this solution ensures that all of the members on board have their lives saved, and also we have a margin of error in our solution with some remaining battery life of 30. Now the last big decision variable for this analysis was the payload decision variable. So this is what's driving profits for our analysis. Our optimization solution was also completed in Excel Solver. So again, we're maximizing profit as our objective, but our decision variables are looking at the 5 different payloads and deciding whether or not we should hold, install, or jettison these 5 payloads. And so the constraints for this model include the battery level, our payload weights, the travel duration, again impacted by our previous efficiency scores, as well as the installation time for each payload. So the overall solution is shown here on the left. We see that the Galaga Exploration payload is jettisoned at segment 1 to ensure that all lives again are saved and that we're able to install the other 4 modules. And overall, this solution ensured a 71 million payload profit within the critical time constraint. I'm now going to pass it off to Eddie to address our people, profits, and precision.
Thank you, Adrienne. We have now shown how we validated our decisions. Let's go back and address how they input into our solution and our definitions of success. First, with people, we didn't want any lives lost. Remember, we're trying to control for optimal PR by addressing people, precision, and profits. So with people, think about Apollo 13 versus the Challenger. When you had the lives lost, that was really bad. They lost confidence in the public, and that impacts future missions. So we wanted to make sure to prioritize people, one, because life is important, but also we want to be able to have future missions and have that confidence. So as you can see, by the end of our journey, we are having the health score above the critical value, and so everyone comes back safe and sound. Next, we want to talk about precision. So if we're operating with negative battery, our ship is not going to be going. So we needed to make sure we were operating above negative. As you can see, by segment 5, we have 30 Bryans of battery power to spare, which is good because it also gives us a little window of error that we can operate in. We have a stop and a start time. And so we have 21 seconds left before that window closes, which gives us just a little wiggle room in case something else were to go wrong. The next thing we want to address is profit. So we did have to jettison the Galaga, but that resulted in the 2 million replacement insurance, but overall we have 91 million net gain, which we consider to be a win in our books. We also are going to be able to keep government contracts, and in addition, we are able to save the lives of people who have cancer, which again will boost that PR and allow us to continue on with confidence in future endeavors and exploration in interstellar matters. So, we wanted to balance stakeholder perspectives by leveraging the data. We had a Goldilocks approach. We couldn't completely satisfy everyone's things because some stakeholders' perspectives negated other ones. So we wanted to find something not too hot, not too cold, but just right. And through that, we decided that people, precision, and profits, optimizing PR was the right solution. No lives were lost. We made it in the critical window, and we have net profit. So we were told failure is not an option. We believe with this solution, failure will not be an option. Thank you, and questions?
When you guys were looking at engine efficiency, did you guys use one model to model every segment, or did you split that out into like 4 different models?
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Adrienne again. For our solver model, the computational load of putting the entire model in Excel was too computationally heavy for maybe our devices, and so we ended up deciding to segment out our solver model into smaller portions, and while ensuring we were still meeting all the constraints and interdependencies, and that's why we went through this structured way, starting with efficiency. We were starting with the things that were most important and working our way through the model. But yes, we did have to break it out into several smaller pieces for computational load purposes, but ensuring that we were still making the most strategic decisions possible. Any other questions?
So why did you sacrifice Galaga compared to maybe one of the other smaller payloads?
So we created an Excel solver based on the prior constraints that we found with what efficiency scores we wanted to go with, and then also looking at the health score and the engine control. We had to set all of those, and then we went kind of sequentially to figure out what payloads we wanted to eject. So we created an Excel solver model, and that was the one that it gave us, which we were okay with because we actually felt like that aligned with our wanting to optimize PR and save human lives, because we have the cure cancer one, which we were like, we really don't want to eject that. We feel like it would be bad. And we have asteroid defense, plus we have the ones with the government contracts. And I feel like if we were to get rid of that one as well, that probably wouldn't be great for any future endeavors we want to go on contracting with the government. So we were very pleased that our Excel solver model, with the constraints that we had found through other solver models and statistical analysis, justified that decision. It minimized our profit, loss.
On the life support, when you guys chose to go back to standard, I think was it segment 4?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a reason that it was segment 4? Can you talk through the data on that?
You want to do it? Okay, that's a great question. And actually, that was not our original approach. So when we first got our hands on the data set and we were doing some exploratory analysis, we were using the descriptive model that was provided in the case study as kind of an initial gauge. And like we said, we set up kind of our initial constraints that no lives would be lost, and we went about it in that approach initially, finding values that satisfied the constraints with the descriptive model. But then we were like, okay, how can we validate these findings? And so that's when we went in with the Excel solver. And so actually, when we inputted the life support and engine command solver, it gave us a different solution than what we had originally found. And the reason for that is actually more optimal in terms of maximizing battery than our previous solution, because of the differences in duration across segments, and also the differences in weight of the payloads that you're holding at the time before you install them. And so while we had a similar approach before where it was standard, critical, 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 it actually shuffled around the order that we had it in to optimize that we were using those settings at the right times in the mission to optimize battery. And so that's how we came to that conclusion.
Thank you for some silver.
Yes. Any last questions? Okay, well, that looks like it's time. Thank you so much, everyone.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming. We're going to be talking about our Stellar One project, and we're going to walk you through what we've learned in the last couple of days. So before we get too far in, I'm going to give you a little breakdown of what we're going to be looking at. We're going to first be able to meet all of us, the team that's been working on the project. I'm going to explain a little bit about the problem, and then we're going to walk through some data that we learned. We're going to look at the results, and then finally an analysis. So like I said, my name is Taylor Coates.
I'm Wesley Canati.
I'm Claire Barron.
And I'm Blake Gomez.
And we're Team 3. This is the business understanding. This is what we've been looking at the last day. So Stellar 1, the Transport 5, lost half of the engine. And our mission is very high stakes. We have to decide what our goals are, what the mission is. And so we just need to be able to look at what happened. And so we've come up with a few missions and a few goals to look at through the duration of this project. So our objectives are going to be maximizing profit and safety of all passengers. We're going to be optimizing power and fuel efficiency. We're going to be balancing risk and reward, and we're going to look at which is the optimal solution. We're going to ensure a safe and timely return. We've outlined some goals here to ensure crew and passenger survival. And then we're looking at the return of the Transport 5 in good condition for future missions.
Now we'll cover the data understanding. We have a couple inputs that we have to take into consideration when making these decisions. First, we'll go over the 4 passengers of the Transporter 5. First, we have Orzo Sal, our billionaire. He's the highest paying ticketed customer, so we need to make sure his life is not at stake. Rebecca Walls is our cancer survivor. She's the founder of Cancer Purge AI. We have our client tech, Caitlin Taylor, who is there to oversee the installation of the Gallagher exploration. And lastly, we have Jing Hong, our company technician of Stellar Serve 1. He's to oversee all the installations. Next, we see that we have a total of $3 billion in life insurance. That's to ensure that their life is not at stake through this trip. We then have 5 payloads on the ship. We have the Gagla Exploration, which is our Mars travel gateway. All people connect, internet for everyone. U.S. Space Force, which is sought by the Department of Defense. The Cancer Purge AI, which saves 10,000 cancer lives. And lastly, our asteroid defense, our targeting solution. We see that the Space Force has $40 million service revenue and $10 million in launch insurance. That is by far our most valuable, as they are key stakeholders in our day-to-day operations. We also see Cancer Purge AI has the lowest service revenue. However, they have a big societal impact with saving the 10,000 lives here on Earth. Next, we'll look at our travel analysis. You can see at the 0 failure, we have lost half of our engine. We still have about 80,000 miles to go. First, we'll hit Beaker Point. Then we'll go to Strom Circle to install our payloads. Lastly, we'll go to the Tan Canal and re-entry back into Earth in the allotted 2 minutes.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about our key data components. Along with the data, we really wanted to look at each individual variable and see what was in the importance level. So the 3 we came up with were engine command, flight control, and onboard life support. And why we think those are so important is because engine command obviously is kind of the capacity at which your engine is running. Then you have flight control, is it being controlled manually or AI? And then you have onboard life support, so overall, are these travelers, are they taking an impact to their health, or are they in good condition? And we understand that the executive team does have some concerns. We got 4 different inputs from various executives, as you can see, and from various levels of concerns. So starting with return of all travelers, moving into maximizing revenue, not caring about those travelers, a mix of both, and taking an informed decision based on our data analysis. What we're hoping to accomplish is our analysis and our recommendation can kind of ease some of those concerns you guys may have. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Wesley to talk about our results.
Yeah, so as Blake mentioned, we have a varying amount of different objectives, and we're trying to find an optimal solution. Going to the slide, we have identified 2 big feasible solutions. Starting with on the left, you can see this is our recommended solution. At the top priority, we have 4 lives on our ship. We don't want to lose any of those. One for human life factor, but also we believe it would be a PR nightmare to have any life lost. We believe in the aggregate prioritizing all lives saved, no matter profit loss is important. In this case, we're still able to obtain $91 million of $102 million possible profit. We've reached this figure by still prioritizing all $20 million in ticket revenue. We obtained 73 of the possible $82 million of service revenue, and we do lose one of our payloads in this simulation, so we have to pay out $2 million of insurance. As you can see, we successfully installed 4 of the 5 payloads here. The one we decided that we are losing is the Galaga Exploration. This is the lowest in terms of possible service revenue besides Cancer Purge AI, which we've deemed that the societal impact is worth prioritizing that as well. So in this one, we're jettisoning the Galaga Exploration one at the first segment possible. By doing this, we alleviate 20,000 in weight, which helps us, the engine and fuel, make us more efficient. And as we go around our different loop, we're able to install on time and then also get our window of re-entry on time as well. In doing so, we're able to also have a significant margin of error, both in 50 out of the remaining 630 batteries, which is 8%, and also 37 seconds of our 2-minute window. On the right, this you can think of as your pure financial perspective. In this one, we do lose a life, but we are obtaining $102 million, or 100% of all service and ticket revenue, and not paying out any insurance. The life lost in this case would be Jinghan, our service solution, a company employee. He had the lowest beginning health, and due to our decisions to not prioritize some of that health or life support in this case, he does not make it upon re-entry. In this case, we also have a little bit of margin in terms of our time re-entry, but we do land with 0 battery, which is feasible. We land safely. However, the margin's a little steep there. Go to the next slide. Blake's going to walk us through how we obtain these actual results in our
Thank you, Wesley. So we were able to do a descriptive analysis on our historical data that was given to us. As you can see, heat, vibration, and pressure, and efficiency rating. And in this process of doing this, we quickly learned that this data that we received has no exact relevance to our current problem, as there is no reference to the current data we were using. So we just thought that would be a good metric to kind of add on to that. And then we have our correlation analysis. As you can see, heat by efficiency, pressure by efficiency, and vibration by efficiency aren't really impacted in this matter. And then when we have segment by distance by efficiency, you can see we are at 41.8%. And now I'm going to hand it back over to Claire to talk about our analysis approach.
Now we'll dive a little bit deeper into how we worked as a team to make the most comparable solutions. So Blake and Wesley used the Excel solver as linear programming, and they found our optimal solution through simulation testing. Myself and Taylor did the interactive testing, where we explored different options through the development app that was given to us.
Yeah. So I'll talk about more about what we deem that optimal solution, in which case we were saving all 4 of the possible lives while still prioritizing revenue, in which case we obtained 89%. So in this one, our most important factor here is the preservation of the rocket. If we don't get the rocket back safely and miss the window, all lives are lost, and never able to do future business, and so this essentially makes our business moving forward unviable. In this case, we're able to preserve all 4 lives, like I said, and still have a margin of error on both the payloads, or on the battery and the time, as you can see, and still successfully install 4 of the 5 payloads. Moving into the next slide, this is how we made the decisions that are powering that model. So beginning, as Blake identified earlier, with the 3 main constraints, beginning with the engine. For 3 of the segments, 1, 2, and 5, we identified the 2/3 thrust And then for one of the segments, segment 4, this is a full thrust. I'll explain that a little bit. And then on the flight control, you can either choose AI or manual, in which case you're saving possible battery by switching to manual. In this case, we're using 100% thrust efficiency across the board. In the data, there was no downside to doing this. There is no risk factor, as we would say, of pushing the engines too hard. We identified segment 4 as where we wanted to use full thrust, because as we saw on the map earlier, it's the longest segment of 25,000 miles when the rest are all 20 or less. And since it's the same cost to use that engine capacity across the board, might as well use it on the longest segment. On the onboard life support, as long as they're over 1 remaining health, they're deemed fully healthy in the terms of our model that we were given. And so you can see we put them on critical life support to save some battery power. And then on the last segment, we switch them up back to standard or comfy. It's been a long trip, we want to get home safely, and so that's why we chose that segment as the one to bump them up. Lastly, on the payloads, as I mentioned earlier, the one payload that we're choosing to jettison is the Galaga Exploration, which is for Mars. We deemed it the least important subjectively, but also it made the model work as in terms of being high enough in weight that when we discard it, we can get it there safely, while also still meeting the rest of our stakeholder demands. We are able to successfully install the other 4 payloads, which brings us back to 89% of the total $102 million revenue. If you go to the next slide, I'd love to take any questions, and we've identified that our business will be viable in the future and speeding through space with superiority.
So how'd you guys approach creating the, I guess, linear program or linear model that you used in Solver?
Yeah, I have it in the appendix. I'd love to show you. So beginning with the constraints we kind of laid out, we switched each of those where there's more than one binary option. For example, engine, you can choose 1/3, 2/3, or full. We converted that into 3 binary decisions. The same was made for life support. You have off, standard, and critical. In which case, either at each segment you get to make a decision for each of the 5 payloads that are conditional. So each one you either get to hold or jettison at A, B, D, or E, or at C you either get to decide if you're going to hold it or install. In which case it's conditional. So for example, if you jettison at point A, you don't get to make a decision the rest of the way because it's already gone, right? So those are the constraints on the top. Then because we converted to 3 constraints or 3 binary decisions for both engine control and life support, basically we set a constraint where you're only allowed to choose one, i.e. for that segment you can't have both 2/3 and full power. Does that make sense? Same for the life support. Each payload only gets 1 action decision per segment, like I mentioned, and then there's a max capacity for battery of 630. That was a constant given to us. In the model, we ended up with a remainder of 50 or 8% left. Also, we set the subjective constraint that we wanted to keep all the passengers alive. Like we pointed out, there's other models where you can obtain other objectives by not letting one of the passengers live, but we believe in the long run for PR and viability of the company, there should be a constraint that they all live. And then lastly, you have to, of course, land during the reentry window. This can be too small to really see, but you can basically see it on the left in Excel, like you set the constraints for cell, and then on the top right, those are kind of the variable cells that Excel changes as it runs the simulation. And then here's all the under the hood calculations that are powering the solver. Essentially, at its core, solver takes all your constraints and tries to find the most optimal solution by running simulations. If you use the data app, you're basically manually clicking around until you find things, versus solver can run thousands or millions of little sub-problems much faster than humans.
Can you go into a little more detail about looking at the historical efficiency of how you were able to rule out that they were having the influence?
Yeah, so when we looked at the historical data, I mean, obviously it had the heat pressure and vibration, and then we went back in to look at the original data set with the descriptive, and we didn't find any metric related to going back to that data for a specific time, referencing the current situation we were in. So kind of from that alone, that analysis alone, we kind of ruled out that that's something that we can fit into with what we were working with.
How and why are you so confident that you can get 100% efficiency on the manual?
Yeah, I'll definitely explain that. So in this case study, we were not given any downside, but we also did run another simulation that's not here. If you don't want to push engines 100%, let's say you want to do 80%, that's totally fine. The way you can do this is if you, instead of jettisoning just the first segment at segment A, you can either jettison the Space Connect, which is internet for everyone, at either segment A or B. It gives you, still within the entry window, it drops your profit from 91 to, I believe, 73. So you're losing $18 million of service revenue, and you're also paying out between the insurance. This still keeps you within the range, but you're able to decrease the thrusters to about 75 to 80% and still stay in the window. Obviously, you are jettisoning extra payload, but regardless, whether it's 73 or 91, it's still a profitable mission, and let's be viable moving forward.